What happens when a country once mocked for endless blackouts suddenly builds the largest power plant in its history? Not in Paris, not in New York, but right here, in the heart of West Africa. And here's the twist. While people in Ouagadougou prepare to flip on the lights, power brokers in Washington and Brussels are the ones breaking into a cold sweat. Because if a so-called poor nation can fuel itself, maybe dependency is dead. This is the story of Burkina Faso's 150-megawatt leap. And yes, at the center of it all stands Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young soldier who turned defiance into a blueprint. But before we go further, let's make it personal. Where are you watching from right now? Are you in the US, catching this before work? In Africa, where power cuts are part of daily life? Or somewhere in Europe, wondering if energy politics here look familiar to your own? Drop a comment. We'd love to know your side of this story. You're tuned in to Africa Daily Good News, the place where we bring Africa's headlines straight, raw, and unfiltered, for viewers across America, Africa, and beyond. And if you're new here, welcome to the family. So let's dive in, because when a nation decides to generate its own future, the news isn't just about megawatts, it's about a movement. Now, here's how Burkina Faso just shocked the world. Burkina Faso was once the country where a single flicker of light could feel like a miracle, and a blackout was not an exception, but the rule. Imagine waking up and never knowing if the fan would spin, if the fridge would keep food cold, or if the hospital down the street would have power for surgery. That was daily life. And yet, in that same place, construction crews are now raising steel and pouring concrete for a 150-megawatt thermal power plant, the largest in the nation's history. How do you reconcile a country once defined by darkness suddenly betting on one of the boldest energy projects in West Africa? The numbers alone make headlines. This plant will eclipse the 22-megawatt station in Ouagadougou, overshadow the 55-megawatt extension in Kosodo, and even challenge the scale of Komsilga itself. But the story isn't only about capacity, it's about the choice to act when everyone expected hesitation. For years, Burkina Faso leaned on imports from Ghana and Ivory Coast, paying the price of dependency every time a neighbor had a shortage or a political squabble. One switch flipped outside its borders could dim entire cities inside. Now, with this plant, that leash is being cut link by link. And here's where it gets interesting. Most people assume sovereignty comes through speeches, flags, and slogans. But ask any American family stuck during a power outage, when the house is dark, the fridge is silent, and the kids can't sleep. The government's promises feel meaningless. Power, in the most literal sense, is legitimacy. Burkina Faso's leaders have understood what many outsiders miss. When the lights stay on, people believe. When clinics hum, when factories don't stall, that is when leadership becomes real. There's a human layer, too. Talk to anyone in Ouagadougou who has lived through the rolling blackouts, and they'll tell you about missed school assignments, spoiled food, or the neighbor's generator rattling through the night. One shop owner once said, "We sold candles, not products." That short story sums up an entire economy stuck in survival mode. Now, the promise is different. Instead of waiting for imports or handouts, the nation is building its own backbone, and that shift changes not just the grid but the psychology of a people. Maybe the critics are right to point out the risks. Diesel imports will still be costly, emissions will be debated. But here's the twist within the twist. It's not only about efficiency, it's about defiance. In a world where wealthy nations lecture Africa to wait for perfect green conditions, Burkina Faso has chosen to act now. After all, what matters more to a student studying under candlelight? A report on climate goals or a bulb that actually works tonight? This first step is both technical and emotional, bricks and belief laid side by side. And it raises the question, if a nation long trapped in the dark can suddenly build its largest power project ever, what comes next when that first surge of electricity reaches homes and factories? That's where the story deepens, and the scale of change becomes impossible to ignore. Blackouts are supposed to break people, not build nations. Yet in Burkina Faso, years of darkness have produced something different. A stubborn resilience that now fuels its biggest leap forward. The 150-megawatt thermal plant rising on the outskirts of Ouagadougou isn't just steel and engines. It is the answer to decades of waiting. For too long, electricity here was borrowed, imported, or rationed. Each outage was a reminder that the country's future could be dimmed by decisions made outside its borders. Now, that equation is being rewritten. The facts are blunt. Burkina Faso once depended on Ghana and Ivory Coast for stability. Whenever a cross-border line faltered, Ouagadougou's streets went silent. Hospitals scrambled for generators, and factories lost entire shifts. But with this project, the leash weakens. Sovereignty stops being an idea in speeches and becomes current flowing through wires. And in that sense, the plant carries more political weight than any summit or treaty. Still, here's the irony. Critics argue that building a thermal plant in an era of solar and wind is backward. But people don't live in reports or promises. They live in houses where the fridge spoils when the power cuts. Americans know this too. When the grid fails during storms, debates about climate goals vanish, replaced by the urgent question, when will the lights come back on? In the same way, Burkina Faso has decided its citizens cannot wait for perfect solutions. Imperfect power today is better than perfect promises tomorrow. Take the story of AWA, a tailor in Ouagadougou. For years, she timed her sewing around the grid's unpredictable rhythm. Sometimes the machines ran, sometimes they didn't. She lost clients not because of skill, but because of electricity. With the new plant, her hope isn't just more watts, it's consistency. A steady current means steady work, and steady work means dignity. That kind of change is invisible in numbers but profound in lives. And so the narrative twists again. What outsiders see as a gamble on costly fuel, locals see as a down payment on freedom. Every engine installed is not only hardware, but a statement. The country refuses to be trapped by scarcity. Maybe sovereignty really does start at the socket in your wall. Maybe resilience, after all, is built megawatt by megawatt. The momentum of this project carries a certain inevitability, as if the darkness itself has been converted into fuel. And as steel rises higher on the site outside the capital, one question begins to glow brighter. If this is only the beginning, how far can Burkina Faso push the boundaries of its own energy revolution? In most countries, electricity is invisible until it disappears. In Burkina Faso, disappearance was the norm. Entire neighborhoods would hold their breath when the current cut. Children staring into darkness, parents waiting for the low hum of a generator to break the silence. Outages didn't just inconvenience, they defined trust in leadership. And here's the sharp truth. In the Sahel, electricity is politics. A government can talk about reform, sovereignty, or progress, but if hospitals can't keep their machines running, those words collapse into shadows. That's why the 150 megawatt project has become more than infrastructure. It's a test of legitimacy. For years, power outages drained more than batteries. They drained confidence. People began to measure leaders not by the length of speeches, but by the hours of light in their homes. And isn't that universal? Think about the United States. Whenever a storm wipes out power for a few days, frustration with local officials skyrockets. Studies show Americans often link reliable electricity with government competence more directly than they do taxes or public services. If that's true in a wealthy grid, imagine its impact in a fragile one. Burkinabè leaders seem to have grasped this link. By turning a technical project into a political act, they're betting that electricity can become the loudest campaign speech. And maybe they're right. Ask Mariam, a nurse in Ouagadougou. She recalls a night when a blackout forced her clinic to deliver a baby by flashlight. The child survived, but the fear never left her. For her, this plant is not about megawatts on paper. It's about never having to feel that helplessness again. There's a twist here that outsiders often miss. Western critics scoff at the reliance on thermal energy, insisting that the future must be purely renewable. But to a family that has waited in the dark, reliability is the true green. The irony is thick. Lectures about sustainability often come from countries that built their own wealth on coal and oil. Burkina Faso's answer is pragmatic. Use thermal for stability today, expand solar tomorrow. That dual track isn't contradiction, it's survival turned strategy. So the stakes are layered. Light means legitimacy. Legitimacy means sovereignty, and sovereignty can shift an entire region's balance of power. Which leads to a natural question. If one project can rebuild trust at home, what happens when it starts reshaping relationships beyond Burkina Faso's borders? Progress in Burkina Faso was never born in conference halls. It was hammered together in small power stations scattered across the country. And that's the paradox. Outsiders often saw only insufficiency, while inside the borders, every kilowatt felt like survival. Bobo Dioulasso carried its factories with a modest 43 megawatts. Ouagadougou's 22-megawatt plant, once hailed as a turning point, looks tiny now but was once the pride of a capital trying to stand on its own. Even the 7.5-megawatt plants in Fada and Ouagadougou kept towns alive in ways no statistic can capture. Each was a lifeline, fragile but real. When mapped together, these stations read like chapters in a book of resilience. Every one of them was a response to scarcity, proof that even without vast resources, the country refused to surrender. And isn't that a pattern we see in human behavior everywhere? Most people don't leap straight into stability. They stumble forward, step by step. Studies in consumer habits show that Americans, for example, tend to adopt new routines gradually, buying one energy-efficient bulb before switching the whole house. In the same way, Burkina Faso built piece by piece until the momentum became undeniable. Yet hidden in those small victories was a twist. Each plant, while essential, also exposed the limits of dependency. Diesel imports spiked with global oil prices. Subsidies strained the budget. The lights of an entire city could dim because of politics across a border. It was progress with strings attached, a fragile independence that could unravel overnight. And then came the pivot, the decision to scale up on a level never attempted before, to replace survival with stability, to turn scattered sparks into a backbone. The leap to 150 megawatts is not just about adding capacity, it is about closing a chapter of improvisation and opening one of intent. One Burkinabè engineer told a story of spending nights repairing engines in Kosodo, knowing full well that whatever power they restored could vanish the next day with a fuel price hike. For him, this new plant isn't just work, it's redemption. It's the chance to finally build something that lasts longer than the crisis of the week. The mood is shifting. What once looked like patchwork now begins to resemble a design. And as the scale grows, so does the question. If scattered efforts could keep a nation alive, what happens when a single project begins to unify the grid? That's the frontier waiting just beyond this moment. Western capitals warn against it, yet Burkina Faso builds anyway. That contradiction is jarring. At a time when think tanks in Paris or Washington preach that the future must be solar, wind, and hydro, Ouagadougou is pouring money into a thermal plant. But here's the hidden twist. The country is already building solar too. Zagtouli, the largest solar farm in the Sahel, is online. Renewables are coming, but stability cannot wait. This new plant is not a rejection of green energy. It is a bridge toward it. The decision may look reckless from abroad, but inside Burkina Faso, the logic is sharp. Families don't plan their lives around global conferences. They plan around whether the light stays on long enough for kids to study or the fridge to preserve food through the night. Americans can relate. When storms knock out the grid, most households don't debate carbon targets. They rush to the nearest store for backup power. According to surveys, nearly half of U.S. homeowners now keep a generator for emergencies. It's not ideology, it's survival instinct. Burkina Faso's choice carries that same instinct, only scaled to a nation. Critics call it costly, but ask the shop owner in Bobo Dioulasso who lost inventory every blackout. For him, the price of diesel is real, but the price of dependency is worse. He remembers a week when imported electricity failed, leaving his town in silence. Sales collapsed, food spoiled, and families went without income. For him, this new plant is not a debate. It is protection from being hostage to someone else's grid. And there's another irony. The very nations scolding Africa for building thermal plants built their own prosperity on fossil fuel. The hypocrisy is not lost on ordinary Burkinabè. They see the lectures, and then they see their own children doing homework by candlelight. Which carries more weight in the moment? A white paper in Brussels, or a working bulb over a school desk in Ouagadougou? So the project becomes layered. It is not only energy security, it is defiance. A signal that Burkina Faso will not wait politely for permission to power its people. And that defiance carries political energy of its own, flowing through wires and voices alike. The leap to 150 megawatts is both technical and symbolic, both present survival and future promise. The mood is shifting from caution to conviction. If the nation can hold steady with this plant, then the conversation will no longer be about whether Burkina Faso can provide for itself. The conversation will be about what kind of leverage comes next, and how sovereignty built in kilowatts can start echoing across borders. Burkina Faso was never supposed to be the one leading. That's the contradiction. Landlocked, resource-strained, written off by outsiders. Yet it is this very country raising a project that could ripple across the continent. A 150-megawatt plant on the edge of Ouagadougou may look local, but its shadow stretches far beyond national borders. Every kilowatt produced here chips away at the idea that Africa must always wait, must always borrow, must always obey. The regional stakes are clear. For decades, Burkina Faso relied on imported electricity from Ghana and Ivory Coast. Each disruption, whether technical or political, reminded Burkinabè families how fragile their security was. But now, with this plant, that fragility shifts into leverage. Instead of begging for stability, Burkina Faso begins offering it. Energy no longer arrives as charity, it becomes a bargaining chip. And when sovereignty is powered by actual volts, neighbors take notice. There's a deeper human angle. When people can trust that power will be there tomorrow, habits change. Factories plan bigger orders. Students study later into the night. Small businesses stay open past dusk. Psychologists note that human confidence grows when uncertainty shrinks. In the U.S., surveys after major blackouts show communities often report a spike in anxiety long after the lights return. If that is true in wealthy grids, imagine the release when a fragile system finally steadies. For Burkinabè youth, the majority of the population, this stability isn't abstract. It's the foundation on which they can picture futures at home instead of looking abroad. But the twist is sharper than domestic relief. Western capitals criticize the choice of thermal energy, warning about emissions, while at the same time running economies still powered by fossil fuel. To many Africans, the hypocrisy is glaring. And maybe that's why this project resonates more as defiance than development. It says, if others built their strength on coal and oil, Burkina Faso will not apologize for building its sovereignty on diesel while it scales up renewables in parallel. One young entrepreneur in Ouagadougou described it this way. Before, every business plan started with a generator. Now I'm planning without one. That short story carries a bigger weight than charts or reports. It captures the quiet revolution, moving from improvisation to intention, from survival to strategy. So the arc bends upward. What began as scattered plants, fragile and uncertain, converges into a backbone bold enough to challenge dependency itself. And the natural question lingers. If one of the most overlooked nations in the Sahel can dare this leap, what excuse remains for the larger economies still waiting on permission? The lights of Ouagadougou may soon shine brighter, but the glow could travel further, reminding a continent that sovereignty, like power, belongs to those willing to generate it. It's almost ironic. What outsiders dismissed as a fragile, landlocked state has now lit a signal brighter than many of its wealthier neighbors. Burkina Faso's largest power plant is still rising from the ground, yet the story has already traveled further than its megawatts. It tells of a people who once timed their days by outages now daring to plan by consistency. And that shift, moving from fear of darkness to trust in light, carries more political weight than any treaty. Look closer, and you see how deeply it cuts. In the past, a blackout meant not just lost electricity, but lost dignity. Children doing homework under candlelight, businesses wasting days of labor, patients suffering in unlit clinics. Today, the same country is building its own backbone, declaring that survival is no longer enough. And here's the hidden twist. This isn't just about energy, it's about rewriting the psychology of a nation. When people can count on the grid, they start counting on themselves. Isn't that a universal truth? Most Americans, for example, only notice electricity when it disappears. Research shows frustration with local leaders spikes the moment outages stretch beyond a day. In that sense, power is more than convenience. It's trust, it's legitimacy, it's proof that leadership is real. Burkina Faso has tapped into that same human truth, turning a technical project into an act of political courage. One shopkeeper in Ouagadougou put it simply, "Before, I sold by daylight. Now, I'm preparing to stay open at night." That short story is small, but it captures the mood shift of an entire society. From reactive to proactive, from waiting to daring. And if this is what one plant can spark, the question grows larger. How many more lights must switch on before the continent itself changes course? Burkina Faso's gamble may be measured in megawatts, but its meaning is measured in sovereignty. And as the foundations settle on the outskirts of the capital, the feeling settles too that this is more than construction, it is a declaration. The grid is rising, the stakes are rising, and maybe Africa itself is rising with it. So as we close this chapter, the glow from Ouagadougou still lingers. Because in the end, power is not just energy, it's the freedom to decide your own future. And the story of Burkina Faso is a reminder that even nations long overlooked can surprise the world the moment they dare to flip the switch.